one of these super sugars that is in processed foods is high fructose corn syrup, or HFCS for short. So humans have evolved to seek out sugars and starches because it's a good source of energy. But that's fine if you only eat natural, unprocessed foods. The problem is processed foods. So natural foods like fruit or honey. This fruit has fructose. Honey has glucose. The body needs those. The problem is processed foods in which there are added sugars, usually in the form of HFCS. So high fructose corn syrup starts off from the natural sugar fructose that comes from corn. So this is processed the same way as fructose or glucose. You break down the fructose or the glucose bonds, the bonds between carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and that releases the energy as in where fructose begins naturally. It is then treated with enzymes and has a high concentrated level of fructose, the monosaccharide fructose, fruit sugar. So fructose is sweeter than glucose, and it is metabolized same as glucose. It's natural. The problem is there's too much of it when we are eating processed foods. So if you look on labels of processed foods, it is going to be written high fructose corn syrup, which doesn't cause any warning bells because fructose, oh, that's fruit sugar, that's natural. Corn, oh, that's just food, that's natural. But the combination of all of this is really completely unnatural. Having a concentrated version of sugar is not something the body needs. So high fructose corn syrup is added to many foods to improve the taste, making something sweeter, but more common to improve the texture, shelf life, and appearance. Basically, adding sugar to a food allows that food to be stable and not go bad or decompose, to have a bread that doesn't mold and you can keep on your shelf for 2 weeks. Or to have a bread that has a nice brown color on the top because you added some sugar to the top, and the browning of the Maillard reaction allows for that bread to look like a really tasty bread. So high fructose corn syrup, HFCS, is a common food additive in all of these foods shown here. In fact, this is not only listed as high fructose corn syrup. You can also look for it under these same names: natural sweetener, fructose, fructose syrup. It's all the same thing. They're all the concentrated version of fructose, which is very high in calories, does not have the nutritional value. The total grams of sugar in one serving of Coke is 65 grams. So 1 gram of sugar is basically 1 sugar cube or 1 packet of sugar. Would you eat 65 packets of sugar? Would you eat 65 sugar cubes? Well, that's what you're doing when you are drinking one of these standard bottles of Coca-Cola. There are other HFCFs in these foods that aren't even sweet, like French fries. So this is an example of the additive to improve the texture or the appearance, giving more of the browned color. Or how about this salad dressing? That's not necessarily sweet, but it's a food additive here to improve normally the shelf life. Natural sweeteners like sucrose in table sugar or glucose in honey. But there's also artificial sweeteners. So these types of artificial sweeteners, these are synthetic sweeteners. They're sugar substitutes made by chemists, like plastic polymers made by chemists. These synthetic sweeteners made by scientists in a lab to replace natural sugars. So how do these compare as far as calories and nutritional value? So all of these have 0 calories and more improved sweetness. So that's why these packets are a lot less dense. There's a lot less of this sweetener required for the same amount of this natural sweetener. That's because the synthetic sweeteners have a higher sweetness value, compared to the standard looking at table sugar, sucrose, which is 100. So you can get the same sweetness with a lot less of these unnatural, these artificial sweeteners. There's a concern, though, of the health impacts of these sweeteners because they're not natural. Some of them, particularly this saccharin, have been proven to cause cancer. A lot of these are so new, particularly sucralose, is so new that not enough studies have proved conclusive either way. So there are concerns about the health impacts of added sugars and also artificial sweeteners. All of this is from processed foods. So going back to this, if you only eat natural, unprocessed foods, you'll be fine. But this is why food labels have these ingredients. There's a requirement to have these listed on food labels. So by law, a processed food has to have the nutrition facts label. That's the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. And this was actually an older format of the labeling. So in the new format, the nutrition facts label has calories as the largest number value and at the top. And that is something that we know can be calculated from the total fat, the total carbs, and the protein. So converting the masses into calories per gram. So there's also a requirement in this newer food label to indicate the total carbohydrates, how much of those carbs are added sugars. So we know carbohydrates, that is dietary fiber, that is a carbohydrate that can't be digested and does not represent the calories. But in the total carbs, there are also sugars that are natural sugars that account for the sweetness, and also those added sugars that are the high fructose corn syrup, as an example, that are not necessarily going to be nutritional, but will definitely represent added calories. So this is going to be part of the calorie content. They only have value as calories, which is good for energy, but not when you are counting your calories. When you have already met your energy needs with a certain amount of calories, which is about 2,000 per day, processed foods seem to trigger signals in your brain that make you want to eat more and more calories. It starts with the fact that the processed foods have high fructose corn syrup, which your body doesn't necessarily register as sweet because they're not natural sugars. Okay, so high fructose corn syrup is an unnatural sugar. And so it's going to get into your system. So when you eat something processed, this goes into your digestive system, and the brain sees that you ate something that is sweet and starchy. Okay, so the gut will send a signal to your brain saying, okay, I ate something sweet and starchy, I don't need to eat anymore. But if there's extra added unnatural sugars like high fructose corn syrup, your gut doesn't detect the sweetness and doesn't send that signal to your brain and doesn't say, okay, stop eating. Okay, this is also true of these artificial sweeteners, where when you've had something that is a 0-calorie soda or a 0-calorie cookie, your brain sees that and eats this, and the gut expects some sugar. When that is not received by the brain, that hey, the sugar made it down into my stomach, then your brain will still be seeking out more. So the studies have shown that drinking diet soda leads to actually drinking more diet soda and more soda. The shot of it is that these artificial sweeteners are not natural. Your brain doesn't know how to handle a food that looks sweet, tastes sweet, but then doesn't provide the calories. So your brain says, you better eat some more of that. Another problem is hyperpalatable foods. Foods that have a combination of sugar and starch and fat that your body has learned to seek out, because sugars and starches and fat are a great way to provide energy. So human evolution has sought out energy sources in their foods. Well, now what we're met with is something like peanut butter. This is not what we were evolved to deal with. And peanut butter is the package where you get the sugar, you get the sweetness, you get the sweetness and you get the fat, you get the sugar and the fat together. That's very rare in nature, having fat and sugar together when you think about it. Unprocessed foods, natural foods are either going to be just sweet, like fruit, or just the fat, which is the oleic acid in olive oil. So you're not easily going to find natural foods that have both sugar and fat together. Now that is something that leads to cravings and can lead to addiction. So these hyperpalatable foods are not natural, and it's recommended to keep your hyperpalatable foods as far as added sugars to 600 calories per day. So that's one reason to pay attention to the added sugars on a nutrition facts label. If sugar's effect on your brain interests you, in the additional review videos, look for the one called Sugar's Effect on Your Brain.